the theme that has arisen for the few short days that we have together is in the form of a question. And that question is, what are we when we are no longer the pencil with which God writes, as Mother Teresa has said, nor are we the hole in the flute through which God plays, as the great poet Haphias has said. So the purpose of the stories that are told is to bring about the possibility that we can answer this question for ourselves. There's no doubt that we all know the joker, the mystical joker, Mullah Nasruddin. You've no doubt heard of him. Well, Mullah Nasruddin was known for his powers and his knowledge, but Mullah Nasruddin could not read or write. But one day, a wandering fakir came into town, and he announced to the townspeople that for a few pieces of silver he could bring about the ability to make you read and write. So when Mullah Nasruddin heard of this, he hurried into town with his few pieces of silver and handed them over to the fakir, who waved his hand around Mullah Nasruddin's face and then intoned a few incantations, and the mullah went off. And a few days later, the mullah came running into town, waving a book around. "Where is that fakir? Where is he?" And the townspeople said, "Well, he's already left town." And then the townspeople said, "But mullah, tell us, can you read?" And "Yes," said the mullah, "and this book says that all fakirs are frauds and charlatans. Where is he? I want my money back." And then there's the story of another fakir. But, you know, fakirs are the magicians of the Sufi world, so-called. And we know that most fakirs have a bag of tricks. Well, there is a certain fakir by the name of Faisal, and indeed he did have a bag. Well, one day in his wanderings, because usually fakirs are wanderers, he came to a town where he met a priest. And the priest said to him, "Well, you know, the only way you're going to get into heaven is through me." "Well," said the fakir, "I mean, is really this the only way we can get into those other realms?" "Yes," said the priest. "Well," said the fakir, "you won't mind if I just pop you in my bag." The priest said, "Oh, it just proves what a barbarian you are. May the Lord save your soul." But the fakir opened his bag and popped in the priest, and he was never seen again. So it so happened that in his wandering, the fakir Faisal was his name, he met a lot of priests and monks and so forth, and they all kind of said the same thing. Well, he thought, this is not on, you know, the equality and all of those kind of things, so he just popped them in his bag. And then after some while, he thought, well, you know, I'm seeing in this existence, in this life, there's so much bad, there's so much evil. So he just started to pop that all in his bag too. Well, you know, after some time, it so happened that because there wasn't enough bad stuff in the world, that there are a lot of hungry demons flying around. So he decided to pop them in his bag too. But after a while, you know what demons are like. He popped them in his bag, and the bag was getting more and more inflated. So he thought he better do something about it. So he went to a blacksmith, and he said, "How much will you charge me to flatten this bag as flat as a piece of paper?" And the blacksmith said, "Well, 10 pieces of silver." So Pfizer was happy to pass that over, but every time the blacksmith hammered the bag, it just kept inflating again. After a while, the blacksmith said, "Oh, you must have a pack of devils in this bag." The baker just smiled and nodded. So finally the blacksmith gave up, and so Pfizer gave him a couple of pieces of silver just to compensate him for his troubles, and he went off on his way, continuing his business. But you know, life passes, and there came the time where it was time for Pfizer to leave the body. And he found himself at the gates of hell. He said, "What am I doing here? All I did in my life was deal with evil. I put it in my bag." And the demons outside the gate of hell said, "Well, you know, you concentrated on the bad, you concentrated on the evil, you belong in here." "Oh, no, said Pfizer. "I'll just pop hell in my bag," and that's what he did. Into his bag. So of course he had nowhere else to go, so he had to make his way to heaven. So he got to the pearly gates, and he's standing there, and there's the angels outside the gate, and they said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, there's nowhere else to go because I've just popped hell in my bag. You have to let me in. There's nowhere else." And he said, "And if you don't, I'll just pop you in my bag." And then, in a more serious vein, in a time and place long ago, in the great land of India, there was born to an elderly couple a son in their old age. They called him Krishna, and indeed Krishna lived up to his name. He was a gentle, loving, caring and devoted soul, wise beyond his years, and it was expected that he would take care of his elderly parents until they passed on. But one day, Krishna was on an errand, and while he was walking down the road towards his home, a horseman came, a representative of the king, a crier, calling out, "Who will sacrifice their child to save the kingdom?" Immediately, all the parents hustled their children in behind closed doors. But Krishna stepped out into the road in front of the horseman, and he said, "I will sacrifice myself for the sake of the kingdom." The crier said, "But should you not ask your parents first?" And he said, "No, I will tell them." But then, as the rider stepped down from his horse, Krishna said, "But, sir, would you tell me why it is that I must be sacrificed?" And so the crier led Krishna over to the shade of a tree, and they sat down. And the crier said to Krishna, "You know that our king is young, virile, handsome, kind. And you know also that for some long while he has longed to find a queen. But being unsuccessful, he's spent his time hunting in the forest to assuage his loneliness and his longing. And several days ago, our king was hunting in the forest when he was separated from his courtiers, and becoming lost in the forest, he found himself beside a river, and stopping to drink and to give water to his horse, he happened to see the most beautiful maiden that one could set eyes on bathing in the river, and he immediately fell in love with her. But it so happened that this maiden was the daughter of a hermit, a great sage who has set up a colony, a small ashram we might call it, in the forest. And so he had to seek the permission of the sage for the hand of this maiden. When our king approached the sage, he was recognized immediately, and the sage scolded him. Day after day after day, said the sage, you come into this forest and destroy the animals. They live in fear unless you vow to no longer cause this forest to have the disturbance of your presence. Only with this oath can you have my daughter to wed. The king immediately gave his vow that he would never again come into the forest for the purpose of hunting. And so immediately the wedding was undertaken. The next day the king left the sage and his community, and taking his bride he set out to return to his palace. But the journey was long. He'd travelled far. So night fell before they'd completed their journey. So they found the shade of a great tree beside a river, and there they consummated their marriage, lying in each other's arms peacefully for the night. But in the morning the king awoke to feel the presence of a great shadow over them. And there before his eyes was a demon of monstrous proportions, fangs dripping. The demon said to the king, "How dare you? How dare you come into my domain without giving any acknowledgement nor thanks? For this you must pay a price. If you do not bring to me within 7 days a young and innocent boy to sacrifice, I will destroy your wife and your kingdom." So our king, in great distress, has returned to his palace with his bride and sent me forth to seek the sacrifice of this pure child. Krishna went back to his parents, and they wept and said to him, Krishna, we dare not lose you. Who will take care of us in our dotage? But Krishna, in his wisdom, was able to explain to them in mystical and esoteric terms why he had to sacrifice his life. The next day, the king and his entourage came, and with solemn pomp, Krishna, his parents, the king and entourage entered the forest. Coming to the river and the great tree, the monstrous demon awaited them. There was an altar on which Krishna was to be placed, and on the instructions of the demon, Krishna was laid out with his mother at his feet and his father at his head. The king standing beside the altar with his sword raised high, awaiting the instruction of the demon. But just as the sword was raised, Krishna began to laugh, and his laughter rang out into the forest. The demon shouted, "Why are you laughing?" And Krishna said, in life, when we're in trouble, we would turn to our mother and our father. And here it is, my mother at my feet and my father at my head when I am to be sacrificed. And if our mother and father cannot aid us, we would turn to the highest authority, the king. And here it is, the king with his sword held high, ready to complete this sacrifice. If I cannot turn to my mother and father, nor to the king, to whom should I turn? Where are you now? Where are you now? Can you end this story already? Lying on that sacrificial altar, with laughter on your lips, but not knowing whether that sword will fall? What are we when we're no longer the pencil with which God writes, nor the hole in the flute through which God